You're listening to ayahuascapodcast.com.
You ate a mushroom and it made you hear colors? What does that even mean? You could see music? So I started going down these rabbit holes. I started seeking out literature, going to the library and checking out books like Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice that was about someone, Mark Plotkin, who apprenticed with some indigenous tribes in the Amazon. And then eventually I discovered Terence McKenna, and it was something that put everything in perspective for me at the time as someone who was very interested in these compounds, didn't really see a way they fit into my life. So fast forward to 17, 18, I decided to try them, and I did my homework, my due diligence. I didn't just jump into it blindly. And I had a really comforting, grounding, inspiring, beautiful experience. Like so many people will tell you about their experiences with mushrooms. This one was the first one. And it blew the roof off my imagination. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know why I never heard about these things, or the things I did hear were very negative. Of course, it did not reflect my experience at all. I had a very, I would call it, uplifting, beautiful, eye-opening sort of experience. So I feel very fortunate. I was in a good frame of mind. I was in a good place in my life. And that really just set me off on this path of inquiry, trying to learn more about these substances, about the cultures that have traditionally used them, about why they're so threatening and so restricted from our modern Western culture. And ultimately, at that point, there was no, quote, space, right? It was like a very niche, underground, psychonaut bubble of people who were interested in drugs and altered states. And that grew over decades at this point, 20 plus years, into now there's a formal-ish psychedelic space, an emerging industry, research, clinics working with them, etc. So I think it was really just a lifelong curiosity that turned into almost a calling, to use sort of a humorous word about it. But yeah, that's essentially how I ended up here. Is it's been me pulling on a thread for many years, and then ultimately arriving at satire and humor as being my contribution and my way of giving back. I'm not a clinician, I'm not a guide or a therapist or anything like that, but I do have a lot of experience, and I found a way to integrate that experience into my life over many years, which we can talk about. And I find humor to be a really beautiful way to kind of make sense of this often tumultuous and chaotic world we live in.
Hi guys, and welcome to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, with the host Sam Believ. Today I'm having a conversation with Dennis Walker, also known as Micropreneur. So Dennis is a creator of Micropreneur, known as Onion of the Psychedelic Space. It's a leading platform exploring the business, culture, and future of mushrooms. Known for his sharp mix of insight and satire, he interviews founders, scientists, and visionaries shaping the global myco industry. Dennis brings humor, clarity, and depth to conversations about functional fungi policy and the modern psychedelic landscape. If you're hearing it on audio, it'll be harder for you to recognize. But if you'd see it on a video, you'd immediately recognize his face. He's a very, very well-known face in this psychedelic space because he makes fun of people like me, and it's very funny to watch. This episode is sponsored by La Huayra Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for the invitation, Sam. And I also make fun of people like me. So it's a pleasure to be here. Hello, everybody.
I think humor is a lovely space. So tell us about, let's start with your story. How did you get into psychedelic space and making fun of the space and into the mushrooms and all of that? What's your journey?
Ever since I was 16, 17-year-old, I became fascinated with plant medicines, the idea of altered states. It's so alien to someone coming from California, growing up in the suburbs and public schools, to all of a sudden start hearing stories and reading on the internet about taking a plant or a mushroom and having these incredible visionary experiences, these spiritual experiences. So I never heard anything about this growing up. I was in a very sheltered, middle-class, suburban bubble. And then in that same bubble in high school, you start hearing stories about cannabis. You have some anti-drug education classes, essentially DARE, things like that, about psychedelic mushrooms. And then when I started hearing stories from people in my extended network, my peers, my friend's cousin, it can't help but get you interested. You ate a mushroom and it made you hear colors. What does that even mean? You could see music. So I started going down these Arrowwood rabbit holes. I started seeking out literature, going to the library and checking out books like Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice. That was about someone, Mark Plotkin, who apprenticed with some indigenous tribes in the Amazon. And then eventually I discovered Terence McKenna, and it was something that put everything in perspective for me at the time as someone who was very interested in these compounds, didn't really see a way they fit into my life. So fast forward to 17, 18, I decided to try them, and I did my homework, my due diligence. I didn't just jump into it blindly. And I had a really comforting, grounding, inspiring, beautiful experience. Like so many people will tell you about their experiences with mushrooms. This one was the first one. And it blew the roof off my imagination. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to know why I never heard about these things, or the things I did hear were very negative. Of course, it did not reflect my experience at all. I had a very, I would call it, uplifting, beautiful, eye-opening sort of experience. So I feel very fortunate. I was in a good frame of mind. I was in a good place in my life. And that really just set me off on this path of inquiry, trying to learn more about these substances, about the cultures that have traditionally used them, about why they're so threatening and so restricted from our modern Western culture. And ultimately, at that point, there was no, quote, space, right? It was like a very niche underground psychonaut bubble of people who were interested in drugs and altered states. And that grew over decades at this point, 20 plus years, into now there's a formal-ish psychedelic space, an emerging industry, research, clinics working with them, et cetera. So I think it was really just a lifelong curiosity that turned into almost a calling, to use sort of a humorous word about it. But yeah, that's essentially how I ended up here. Is it's been me pulling on a thread for many years, and then ultimately arriving at satire and humor as being my contribution and my way of giving back. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a guide or a therapist or anything like that, but I do have a lot of experience, and I found a way to integrate that experience into my life over many years, which we can talk about. And I find humor to be a really beautiful way to kind of make sense of this often tumultuous and chaotic world we live in.
Thank you for sharing your story. I think that's, we all get to this line of work in so many different ways. So there's two sides of you, right? There's this serious side of you that interviews people about mushrooms and their various uses, not just psychedelic. And then there's this funny side of you, the comedic side, the side that I guess most people know. So, talk to us about that. How is that balancing act, and which version of you are we talking to today?
Great question. It's something that I wrestle with a little bit. It's having the inspiration whenever it strikes and being able to pursue something. If I want to do a really serious subject or a really serious story, like, for example, I'm interested in these ethnographic types of experiences. Like, as I mentioned, I'm in Tunisia right now, in the capital of Tunis. And before this, I was in Uganda, and I met some Batwa Pygmy, a community there, which is an indigenous community in Uganda, and they use cannabis. And so I really wanted to explore that when I learned that this was part of their cultural fabric, because there's not a lot of documentation or research or anything like that into cannabis use in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically among the Pygmies. And I just stumbled into it because I was at a mushroom festival. You meet a person, they tell you about a place. Next thing you know, the Pygmies are offering me cannabis, and there's very little outside sort of exposure to this that I'm aware of. And I was doing my proper due diligence, Didn't find a lot about it. So that's a story that would be tough to tell through satire. Or the same thing with the Uganda Mushroom Festival. That's a story where I don't know that it really speaks to satire, where you have sub-Saharan communities that are abjectly impoverished, who are really facing critical urgencies in terms of their limitations, no access to clean water, food, energy issues, things like that, where how do you satirize something like that? How do you tell that story through satire? It's very easy to tell the story of middle class and upper middle class and rich white people who drink ayahuasca one time and they discover that they too are a shaman. And, this is like a very easy, low-hanging fruit. Yeah, the Trustafarians, anyone who spent time in Tulum or Ibiza. And I really think it's an important thing to recognize and to look at, because people tend to romanticize their suffering and their healing. And it's sort of to me, very humorous to be like, you can endlessly fetishize and romanticize this process of healing. Anything can be heavy and dark and traumatic, but there's something about being able to reframe some of those experiences and look at them with a little bit of skepticism, humor, lightheartedness, that to me, in my experience, actually gives you agency over a lot of these experiences and qualities. Because if you keep trying to heal over and over, you can do hundreds of ceremonies, and some people do. Maybe that's their path. And I think that, I have more stories of how I arrived at these insights and why I've arrived at them, I suppose. But as far as balancing seriousness and lightheartedness, I think it's nice when they can dance in between each other. And I think really good satire and humor for me has a really dark, heavy element to it. It's almost like you can't talk about these things really effectively and communicate them without being able to put a sense of humor on them. And I tested that theory extensively when I first really started pushing how far I could go with Mycopreneur. And I started examining things like geopolitics. Like I was making satire on the Israeli-Palestine border and going into refugee camps. I mean, talking about things that are hard to satirize and speak to. These kinds of experiences I found at the time, you could examine them through satire, but other times it's like today, that would be very hard to do that same kind of satire. This was like 4 years ago, right? So I think that it really just depends on the subject matter, the story. And the last bit I'll say here is satire usually to me involves punching up. You don't want to satirize like a vulnerable single mother in a refugee camp. Like that's not really satirical material, right? But satirical material might be the white Trustafarian with the dreadlocks who's going to go save the world by starting an ayahuasca center in the Amazon, and it turns into a pyramid scheme and they create a influencer culture around it. That's to me what you would satirize, and it's being able to judge or distinguish which one deserves which treatment.
Yeah, and I I watched a few of your videos. There's always a part there where they build an Amazon warehouse next to the retreat for some reason. It is funny. Yeah. So I totally agree with you, and I agree with the importance of humor in space, and especially in such serious matters as healing and as psychedelics. And I think I'd like to invite you to my retreat. I think you'd appreciate the amount of humor. We have those jokes that we recycle over and over again because there's this, there's a lot of under the belt humor that comes with ayahuasca because of the purging and things like this. So there's a couple jokes that I'd love to share with you. So yeah, you are officially invited. But the things you do is basically like psychedelic infotainment, right? If you were just a person that would hate on all the psychedelic space, I probably wouldn't be interviewing you. So I can understand that it's like a wrapping. The humor is a wrapping, but deep inside you don't understand the importance and the use of this space. So it's kind of like Trojan horse, right? You lure people in with funny criticism, and then you kind of keep them. You educate them through your podcast. Is that a fair assessment of your idea?
I think so. I think it's all about continuing to learn and being open minded. And that's what led me to the humor in the first place. I used to be the first one to defend the seriousness of psychedelics. I mentioned I'm a psychonaut. Some people, maybe if they're new to the work I'm putting out, they haven't been following. Sometimes it can come off as a little bit like this person's making fun of healing culture. But I think that is something I arrived at after years of taking it very seriously. And also, there are potential pitfalls or challenges, and these get recognized sometimes about people who maybe are not in a good position to be serving ayahuasca or serving mushrooms, and they are, because a lot of people don't know where to get this stuff, right? And I've seen that play out. I can share some of the stories about going down to Peru. I went down in 2010, 11, and 12 on retreats to ayahuasca centers. And to me, it was very new. It didn't seem to be as culturally in vogue as it is now. I was among the first people in my peer circle, certainly that I knew in my entire community, who went and had a ayahuasca retreat in the Amazon. And I both got wonderful, wonderful insights and experiences. And I also saw a lot of really unhinged sort of behavior, this idea of you don't really know who's serving it. They didn't necessarily have a lot of safeguards, things like that. So it always has been, in my eyes, kind of a Wild West frontier, for better or worse. And it's still like that. Like, I don't think that the answer necessarily is to strictly regulate it and that there's pushes to do that. But then when you have that Wild West frontier, it means that you're also going to potentially have some chaos that happens, a sort of chaos magic. So, yeah, I think being able to have these experiences and then use humor as a form of integration has been a great tool for me. And it's something that I want to teach that to people too. And just one brief story I love to share. I was at Maria Sabina's house, right? She's like the patron saint of mushrooms from the Mazatec culture. And I've been to her family homestead twice. And the second time was a few years ago, it was 2022. And I took a big dose of mushrooms. I was there by myself with her family. They did a velada, which is sort of the ritual with the copal and incense and prayers and all that. And then they left me there. And I was thinking I was going to have this breakthrough dose experience, because the first time I was there in 2010, I had a breakthrough dose and a completely visionary cosmic level experience. Well, this time, very little was happening. Like, I felt clearly I had the mushrooms in my body, but I really wasn't breaking through to where I wanted to go. And I sort of felt entitled at a point where I was like, I came all the way down here to Oaxaca and I did the whole ceremony and I ate a double dose of mushrooms and nothing's happening. And then I started maybe 3 hours in just thinking of plot lines for skits, I was just bored. I started thinking of plot lines. And then that's when the mushrooms really kicked in. And it felt like there was a sort of collaboration there. And at that point, I realized I'd been doing it for a while, that maybe mushrooms also have a sense of humor. If we're willing to assign agency and intelligence to these substances and say that they do have a spirit and they do have an intelligence, I think they also have a wonderful sense of humor. And why not explore that avenue? In my experience, they've been kicking me plot lines saying, "Oh, here's a good idea," and then all of a sudden it becomes like you have a co-pilot instead of just you trying to figure it out. And then by turn, that becomes very therapeutic as well.
Yeah, ayahuasca also has a very keen sense of humor, and a lot of people report to it. It can tease you, it can make fun of you, it can also be strict. It's interesting with those plant or fungal medicines that sort of have that very pronounced spirit. They do seem to also have a personality. So you mentioned, in the end, like the therapeutic effects of it. So let's talk about your own healing journey, right? A lot of there's this cultural notion that a lot of the comedians become funny because it's the way to sort of navigate the world and sort of run away from some pains and process things. So I'm assuming what brought you to psychedelics in the first place was healing, and I don't believe you share about it much. Can you share to us your own healing journey?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So truthfully, when I first came into psychedelics, and I mentioned I had mushroom experience when I was 17, and then that opened the door to higher doses and further exploration, opened the door to whatever was available. Within the next few years, it was DMT, salvia, different molecules, right? And truthfully, it wasn't about healing when I started. It was about visionary purposes. I was so infatuated with this idea that you could close your eyes and see other worlds. And again, that's the writing of Terence McKenna. It's the writing of Mark Plotkin. It's the Arrowwood trip reports. And in particular, I was fascinated with the writing of McKenna because he is a brilliant writer. I don't necessarily agree with all of his ideas. I think he had a very humorous element. This is a great example. I think people take Terence McKenna as like gospel, what he said, right? But if you read a lot of McKenna, he says like, don't believe me, like have your own experiences, right? I think in my eyes, like if he were to see how he gets deified and like put up on this huge pedestal, he would probably find that very ironic and perhaps distasteful in some ways. I think that it's all about you have your own experiences and you make up your own mind. But it was in particular how adept he was at being able to describe these experiences. And it was at a point in my life where I knew there was something there. I had low dose experiences, but I had never heard anybody talk about them in such an eloquent way. So that opened my eyes to there's something really here. This person, in my eyes, is a brilliant writer. He's really making a lot of sense to me, at least at this point in my life. I'm going to explore this further. And it was a high dose visionary experience. When I was 18 years old, I did a 7-gram solo in the dark experience that really delivered on the money, talking about these close-eyed visuals, open-eyed visuals, very complex landscapes and insights and a feeling of this connectedness with something broader. Very difficult to find the words for it still for a lot of people, much more so when you're 18 living in the suburbs and there's not really that level of culture or familiarity in your immediate community. I remember having that really high dose experience and not being able to really talk to anyone about it, right? It wasn't like today. And even now I'm thinking like, 7 grams, like there's so many different variations of potency and different mushrooms and things like that. Not then, not in my community. You pretty much had access to golden teachers. Sometimes they had penis envy, but that was about it. It wasn't at all like today where there's psychedelic cups and people have 150 mushrooms in their culture bank. So yeah, I feel like it's been a roller coaster of a ride still. And I think it's really important to put time around these experiences too. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, you start to get this sort of honeymoon phase with psychedelics. You romanticize them. You become an evangelist for them, where everybody needs to do them. Everyone needs to try them. But like the older I get, the more I sort of put distance between that version of myself and today. Today, I've been married for 8-9 years. I have a 1-year-old son, or he's turning 1 next month. I've been really committed to my work projects. Like it's different than, 15 years ago where I thought that we needed to get rid of money and, form this new, I still have that level of utopian thinking sometimes, but I just feel like what I see in psychedelics now is people being very infatuated with them and leaning into them all the time. And I also strongly believe in cognitive liberty. So I think people should decide what's right for them. You're not hurting anyone. You want to, macrodose for days on end. That's your decision. But in my own life, I've found a lot of value and being a little bit more intentional, and then also maybe putting a little bit more space between some of the trips.
Yeah, definitely. The integration is important. So that's not the topic I was planning to discuss with you because it's not the funniest one. It's actually one of the boring topics, but I don't know, maybe you have some wisdom you want to share.
Well, let's get into the funny stuff. So how I got into the satire is I was interviewing mushroom entrepreneurs, and that's what I still do. Every Friday, I put out a new podcast, and that's actually become quite lucrative because over 5 years of this, 240 something episodes, lots of other short interviews. I've just built this really cool network of people all over the world who leverage the potential of mushrooms. It's not just psychedelics, right? There's people making materials. There's people building houses out of mushrooms. Someone just built a surfboard that is commercially available in France. They've got a skateboard. So like, I'm doing all these interviews, and after about a year, especially the psychedelic ones, I was just like, just everyone's treating this just like a business, like they're shipping units of apple juice, right? This is mushrooms. This is like one of the weirdest, strangest, furthest out thing. And we've got all these like CEOs now who are trying to turn it into this commercial interest where they're treating it like it belongs on the NASDAQ stock exchange. So it just created this really wonderful setting for humor. And I, in particular, found a lot of humor around these kind of, like I mentioned, I'm white, obviously. I've encountered this a lot where like, God bless the confidence of a white man. You know, a white man goes in, has a psychedelic experience, and then the next thing you know, like they want to launch a company, they want to, you know, be on featured on Forbes and Rolling Stone and stuff like that as a thought leader. And to me, there's just something really beautiful about trying to kind of like take the ego down a little bit. That's sort of what psychedelics for a lot of people are intended to do, or what it often gets promoted. Like you have ego death. But I would challenge that. I think a lot of people, it shows, maybe it's the opposite. You have ego amplification. There's a sense of, I am great. I am the best. I am going to dominate. And to me, satire is a great way of kind of taking people down a peg in a beneficial way. And then I started to learn that this is something historically that various cultures have seen the value in. So like with the archetypal role of the jester, right? And the actual Renaissance, not the psychedelic Renaissance, but like Renaissance Europe, there was usually a jester in the king's court. And the express role of the jester is to bring the king down a notch a little bit. It's to make fun of him. It's because nobody else could do it. If one of the peasants makes fun of the king, they would get their head chopped off. But it was the jester's job to sort of make the king laugh and to lampoon the king. And again, this kind of archetypal figure has shown up in different cultures. And the idea, as far as I understand it, is that they don't want the king to get too full of himself. Like there has to be some element of humanness, and part of humanness is having a sense of humility and being able to look at yourself and being like, you know what? I am being a little bit of a jerk right now. I don't know if it always works, but that's my understanding of the jester's role. Is that there's sort of like an archetypal role, just the way that like there's different figures in a culture. Like you have your king and you have your soldier and you have your damsel in distress. Well, you also have the jester, and that this is a super important role. So yeah, I mean, I have fun with it. And the litmus test I use for if something's worth doing is if it is funny for me. I think, you know, humor is very authentic. It's very complicated. Like, what is humor? Where does it come from? What makes something funny? There's so many different cultural tropes that are tied to that. About if I tell you a joke, like it gets translated from Latvian to English, it might not be funny, right? I used to host exchange students. Sometimes like the Russians would tell me a joke. It's not funny. Like, but it's hilarious in Russian because you have to be able to understand the culture and the context and why it's funny. And that's a lot of humor. So to me, what makes it really cool to do psychedelic humor and mushroom humor is it means that the culture has evolved to a point where people have these shared ideas about why something is funny. Like, you know, if you were to tell mushroom jokes or DMT jokes a few years ago, they'd have to be pretty surface level. But now you can talk about DMT entities in the joke and people know what you're talking about. Or you can talk about like ego death with the mushrooms. People know what you're talking about. This just means that the culture has grown, so we have a shared language. So I think that's another interesting point with the satire.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned language because, you know, with knowledge of language, when you get real proficiency in the language is when you can start making jokes in the language. And also humor does tend to be a sign of a high intelligence as well. So there's definitely something there, but I had a good follow-up for that, and I'm blanking on it right now. Give me 1 second.
You know,
Anyways, I'll just switch the topic.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to
carry
roll
on,
with. Yeah.
No, carry on. You wanted to say something?
Well, I want to point out the difference between humor, or it's like comedy, and satire. I think that's important. And I think satire has a moral component to it too. It's like a sort of a morality tale or like a moral compass for a culture. And for me, stand-up comedy and humor, you could tell poop jokes and they could be funny, and I've laughed at them. Like Eddie Murphy, great comedian, stand-up comedian, also great satirist, but mainly known as a comedian. He talks about when he first started stand-up, like he could just tell poop jokes and fart jokes because he was 16 and like that's all he knew how to tell jokes about. And I think you could do that with satire, but satire usually has an element where there maybe is a teachable moment. And it's this idea of like in a culture, when you want to embed certain social norms or like a way of thinking about something, you can do it satirically and there's a moral component to it. So I think that's important. And also I just want to mention, doing like dark stuff. Like even right now, I'm working on a bit, which I'll probably drop today. That's a collab post for one of the sponsors that I work with. And it has to do with like proprietary mushroom blends, because there's all these themes and elements and it's very niche and nuanced right now. But essentially, most people listen to this are probably familiar with this, but like there's a lot of these quote mushroom chocolates or mushroom gummies that are for sale online. Like TikTok has a trending product right now. I don't even want to use their name, but it's like, you have people who are unfamiliar with psychedelics. They're not going down or drinking ayahuasca or doing integration. It's the sort of consumer culture, right? Where it's like on TikTok shop and it gets marketed as sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They don't use the real words, but like magic mushrooms essentially, but they're research chemicals, right? They're manufactured in a lab. It's not magic mushrooms. It's a lab derived chemical. There's a lot of nuances and debate about how this gets in, but the point is that it's marketed as being this like psychedelic mushroom and it's not. So I'm kind of like creating a meme right now that leans into these tropes about like who uses these products, who sells them. And sometimes you look at them, you're like, oh, this is like potentially very offensive to some people. And I think that's important too. I think it's okay, like you don't want to walk on eggshells. Like we went through a period culturally where like comedians were afraid to say things. It's even happened recently, right? Where it's like people could get in big trouble if they make the wrong joke. And I think that's kind of a sign of a weak, dying culture. Like comedy, satire, this should be the most protected form of speech. And it has historically. And once you start telling people like you need to be really careful who you make fun of and how you make fun of them, then I think everybody loses. And South Park's been a great example of that. South Park has said, if you can make fun of one group or one type of person, you have to make fun of every type of person. And I think there's a lot of value in that sort of ideology right now.
This episode is sponsored by Lawira Ayahuasca Retreat. Most of you know Lawira if you've been listening to this podcast for a while. Some of you might have already been to Lawira before. For those who don't know us yet, we started Lawira 4 years ago. At Lawira, we combine authenticity, accessibility, and affordability. Lawira is currently highest rated ayahuasca retreat in South America with more than 700 5-star reviews and an average rating of 5 stars. If you come to Lawira, you'll experience powerful, authentic ceremonies led by our indigenous shaman, Fernando, in a very beautiful venue just 1 hour south of Medellin, Colombia. We're surrounded by nature and have comforts like hot water, Wi-Fi. At Lawira, our team has guided more than 2,500 people through this life-changing transformation of ayahuasca experience. At the same time, we keep it very affordable. So whether you're coming for healing, clarity, or a deeper connection to yourself, Lawira is the best choice. If it is your first time drinking ayahuasca, you will love our 3.5-hour preparation course and integration support. All of that is included in price, as well as pickup from Medellin, accommodation, and ayahuasca. Visit lawira.com to book your retreat or learn more. Lawira, connect, heal, grow. LAWAYRA.com. No, definitely. I think taking things too seriously is not always good. Let's talk about like the value of humor in this psychedelic wave specifically. So I think they call it third wave renaissance. I believe the previous one was with the hippies, and I think part of the reason it fell apart was the seriousness. Like everyone wanted to change the world, and as you say, utopian thinking. I think humor can help there. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, I would love to go back to 1969 to the sit-in, the love-in, and just like put whoopee cushions under the hippies. Have fun with it. Yeah, there's a real potential right now for humor to really bring healing that people are looking for that maybe they are not getting. Like ironically, psychedelics, mushrooms, ayahuasca, as probably a lot of people can attest to, if they're not respected, if they're not shown a certain level of respect and integrity, like they can just as easily cause harm for people. This is sort of like a blind spot a lot of people don't always want to talk about, but like if you abuse something, it can definitely hit you right back. If you think about things being like a amplifier of internal states, right? So humor, I think, can get to the bottom of a lot of that very quickly. And I heard it framed in a way I liked, where someone I respect a lot, I got to connect with in Austin at South by Southwest. And they mentioned like, when, you're purging with ayahuasca, you think about like throwing up, right, as a purge for a lot of people. Well, like humor, if you get a belly laugh, you're moving the energy down in your belly, and it's like a breath that comes out. You think about breath work of people like breathing deeply, kind of getting to the root of their trauma. If you really hit the bullseye and you have like a deep laugh, you're releasing something very deep. It's in your gut. It's coming out in a very kind of like breath work, it's going way beyond your normal breathing patterns and thinking, and it's touching something very deep. It's touching a nerve. So, I deal with a lot too, as many of us do. I just mentioned just having my son, and the birth process is pretty challenging. It was pretty traumatic. We're so blessed and so grateful. But as any new parent will attest to you, like it's tough when you get your sleep interrupted, your schedule's topsy-turvy. You still have work to do, you have commitments, you have family, but it's like you're taking on so much new energy. I can't like just focus on work like I used to, right? It's like if I take my eyes off this kid, he might fall down and hurt himself, or put his fingers in the plug or whatever. So point being that I'm now finding like I have to deal with a lot of stuff too. And so when I have a chance to find humor in something or make something humorous, it's really beautiful. And I also see this when I travel. I mentioned I've been very fortunate to travel a lot, host exchange students, and I found people in very challenging situations who have wonderful senses of humor. And it's like, if you can find humor and laughter and joy in these challenging circumstances, like what's really going to get to you after that? Like you say, oh yeah, that already happened. I was a soldier. I've been involved in lots of things, and I choose to find joy. You can let your circumstances define you, and it's really easy to tell yourself the story that you're the victim. This thing happened to you, that thing happened to you, this person did something wrong. Well, it's just as easy, or at least if you think about it this way, to make yourself have a different story, like change your story, find a sense of humor. And just briefly, I'll share, that was one of my early exposures to kind of plant medicine healing was with cannabis. It was before I had taken mushrooms, and I had a close-eyed visual experience where someone who was tormenting me a lot at that point in my life, I was having troubles at school, and I didn't know how to feel about this person. And I saw them just like dancing like a clown, like while, they were, it completely reframed my perspective of them. And I was laughing at them, I remember. So that after that, when I would see this person, I'd just be like, I've seen you just like acting like a total fool, and you're no longer threatening or scary to me. I've heard curandero tell me that, but in the Amazon with ayahuasca, telling me that if something's very dark and heavy and it's trying to scare you in your vision, just laugh in its face. Just be like, I'm not scared of you. Like, you look ridiculous right now. You're stuck in this 5D matrix, and I get to go drink my mint tea and drink beer tomorrow if I want. And you're stuck here. By reframing things, it gives you a lot of power over the situation.
Yeah, humor is very important. It's a very powerful tool, and especially if you have kids and you have business and it's busy. I attest to that. I have 3 kids myself, and I don't know if you can see my under eye bags, but I I was woken up by one of them today at 2 a.m. because his diaper leaked and he peed himself, and then I had to go take him to my bed, and so. It is challenging, gets stressful, and humor helps. That's why we would definitely joke a lot. Like I joke a lot. I call myself a sit-down comedian because we sit in word circles and we share. There's a presentation, and I make a lot of dad jokes, and some people find them funny, some don't. But humor really helps. Sometimes for me the problem is not to make a joke. In a serious situation. somebody's sharing something and I find something funny and I'm like, well, I can't really make fun there. And I've a couple times I've made inappropriate jokes. So that's another that's another level there. So are you ever worried about offending people or, getting an enemy or something like that through your humor?
There was a point where I was, but at this point, I'm truly worried about not offending enough people. I don't go out of my way to do it. Maybe I should. But something that happened with Mycopreneur and is in the process, I guess, is like when I first started, I've always been kind of an outsider, right? Like I kind of discovered mushrooms in my own way and was doing doses. And then I was never really connected to like a strong sense of psychedelic community or things like that. So, and I always felt before that, even before psychedelics, just kind of like on the edge of the cool group, like I was part of the cool group, but I was kind of on the edge, and humor was a way for me to fit in. Right. So I was class clown in high school. And just like you say, like I have problems not making jokes. Like I want to make a joke at a funeral, and I want people to make a joke at my funeral and tell jokes and things like that. And like when Mycopreneur became popular, I think it was because I was like really pushing the boundaries as far as I could. Like I mentioned, I went over to Baghdad, Iraq. I was at like Saddam Hussein's abandoned palace above Babylon, and in Babylon, just wanting to be as weird as I could. It was this sense like psychedelics just were really starting to become an industry. There were these conferences happening. I kind of got looped into, through the podcast, some of these circles where it's all of a sudden it's like professional and we're trying to be serious. And there's there's definitely room for that, but not at the expense of the weirdness. So I just said, I'm just going to be as weird as I can be and make a lot of jokes that are kind of over the top. And I pushed it. And then I ended up, this was 2022, doing satire about Davos. But, they did the psychedelic industry meetup in Davos. It was getting mainstream coverage and like The Guardian and BBC. And it was all these stakeholders from like ketamine companies and MDMA aspiring companies and things like that who met at the World Economic Forum. And while this was happening, I was in Palestine. I was in Jerusalem, and then I went to Hebron and kind of learning about that whole story, which of course now is much harder to talk publicly about than it was then. It was still very culturally sensitive, but not nearly the same as it has been in the last like 2 years. So I was like making these absurd videos, but also educating people about the situation, like showing them on the ground how things were in places like Baghdad and Palestine. I was in Israel and then in Egypt. So like kind of this part of the world a lot of people have only read about. And I found that satire became this wonderful vehicle for educating as I was learning. And so, but it started to get popular. And I think it's because people saw like I was being earnest. I wasn't trying to like tell a biased narrative. I was trying to like make sense of what I was seeing and also have a sense of humor about it. And then, that earned me more invitations. All of a sudden I was starting to publish with different platforms, and I kind of got, let's say, taken seriously. So why I mention all this is because at that point when I was creating a lot of this type of content, the point was to see how far I could push it, right? Well, fast forward like 2 years, it wasn't that long after I started, all of a sudden I started getting like all of these opportunities, right? I got invited out to Miami to MC a big conference with Paul Stamets and Rick Doblin. They gave me the Influencer of the Year award. I started getting paid. I got invited out to England to give a keynote at Breaking Convention, which is a huge academic psychedelic, like biggest European psychedelic conference. Next thing you know is like India, first mushroom conference. And then I was in Geneva a month ago, but it was kind of like, it's been like that for the last 3 years. Well, when you start getting like these bigger opportunities and you start getting money, sponsorships and things like that, it kind of changed the game a little bit, like when I was kind of just having fun and seeing how far I could push it, I really didn't have anything to lose. And then you get to a point where it's like, all of a sudden, a lot more people were paying attention, and like I would actually hear about it. If somebody didn't like something I said or they didn't like a video, I get a text, and it felt like people were watching me from all over and all this. I didn't have any issues with this, and at this point, frankly, I could care less most of the time. But like I started having to think like, oh, if I offend the wrong person, whatever, I could get a sponsorship pulled, and then you have to make that choice. You're like, do I want to be making money and getting stage time and getting published and getting quoted and yada, yada, or do I want to like push it a little bit And that was sort of the cultural moment at the time too. Like I mentioned, there have been comedians who get their gigs canceled, or they say the wrong thing and they get a sponsorship pulled. So yeah, but I sort of come out the other side of that and realize, well, like if that's the way you want to approach things, then you might as well just coast into the sunset, because your work has kind of lost its punch. If you're letting other people dictate what you're saying and how you're saying it, I don't think that's what good comedy or good satire is. I think you can be tasteful. So yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm going to see if I can get back to offending people. I think that's the right move.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I remember first one of my we call people that come to my retreat patients, and one of them, Martin, he's also a Latvian guy. He sent me a video, and I was a little bit offended. I remember I was like, so it can definitely trigger sometimes. But my question to you is, I mean, obviously you make fun of white retreat owners, and I'm just happen to be a white retreat owner. So there's definitely a lot of funniness, and I've met a lot of crazy people. I would love to believe that I'm different, right? I'm still probably funny, because like Latvian guy in the Colombian jungle, working with the medicine, it is a funny concept. But have you met retreat owners that you like? Yeah, they're legit. You know, they're doing good work. They're working with tradition. They're helping people. They're not overcharging, or is it always bad?
I think people are not easily camped into like good or bad. And I think that's something we tend to do a lot, is like there's this sort of ideological purity people have when they look at another person about like how they should act. I think there's certain things that really shouldn't be tolerated. And I kind of ran into that unknowingly when I first went out to these Amazonian retreats I mentioned. Like that was really a Wild West situation. And there were really quite a few accusations after the fact, none that I was aware of at the time, but they started coming out later, of things like sexual assault, or like this retreat owner pulling a gun. And like one of my people that I knew who was part of the retreat down there told me later that this retreat owner pulled a gun on him and fired bullets at his feet because he offended him, and then told him he had to leave, and if he ever saw him again, he was going to kill him. That's pretty extreme, right? And I think especially before today's culture, like back then, I didn't know this was a thing, but apparently they could just pay, because I heard this from a lawyer who was working directly with this person. They could pay to get bad reviews removed from sites or suppressed, you know? So they have like now Retreat Guru, and I don't think that was around back then. I was unaware if it was, but for things like TripAdvisor or whatever, where there were reviews of these centers, they could actually pay to have a bad review removed. So, or they could threaten with litigation, things like that. So that if somebody leaves that review or says on a forum, like this retreat owner has done this and X, Y, and Z, they could just get that removed, so that when you do the Googling, and again, this was like 2010, 11, or back then, all you see is great reviews. And, you know, it's like, oh, so they've had 200 reviews and they're all 5 stars or 4 stars or whatever. So, you know, but at the same time, I know that a lot of people are conflicted about the kind of stuff, because they say, well, I had a great experience. Like, I don't think we should be okay at all with having someone like that allowed or able to do things. But again, just trying to paint things into like either this is good or this is bad, most people fall into both camps. So I would like to think that there are ethical operators. I haven't really been to too many retreats since then. I will say the handful of retreats I've been on, I went to one in 2021, I think. That was a mushroom retreat somewhere by invitation. And I also had a really weird experience there. And I'm not in the business right now of trying to like name names and shame people, and those people are no longer operating that retreat. But there's just been like, in my experience, a lot of strangeness, a lot of cult dynamics. I would love to go maybe experience a retreat today, because I do think the culture has learned a lot. I think more people who have been called to serve, let's say, more or less selflessly, or like really called to help people, hopefully they're in those positions. But also, like, I spent a lot of time in Mexico, and it is a way to turn a quick buck for a lot of people, because there's almost no regulation, right? Like if I wanted to set up a iboga retreat in Mexico, it would not be very hard. Like you have to have a few connections, and I've been born on the border. And I've been going to Mexico since 1990 and have lived there on and off for over a decade, right? Or for many years at this point. So point being that I've never opted to do that, but I've seen like backpackers or people come in and they set up kind of like overnight shops where they want to run retreats and things like that. And I've never really been motivated to participate in those. And there have been quite a few stories of how those kinds of things can go awry, where, you know, people aren't doing intake, they're not interviewing, they're just like whoever can pay, you arrive, and then, you know, it can just come off the street basically. Some areas they'll have like signs on the street being like Bufo ceremony tonight. And you can just go smoke 5-MeO DMT with like no prior relationship or knowledge. So I do think it's an interesting dynamic to think about like gatekeeping versus access. And like, I kind of vacillate or go back and forth about like, well, is it one or the other, or it's somewhere in the middle? Because I do think that there's a lot of potential for not ideal experiences and maybe even flat out harmful experiences, like I've heard about and heard direct stories from people of. But at the same time, does that mean you want to make it like super restrictive and like very hard, and you have to get this level of license and this level of clinical training? Like, so I think the community, quote unquote, at large is kind of navigating those boundaries. And that's truly, a lot of that stuff is what drove me back to mushrooms, because I saw, wait a minute, do I personally need to go fly down to the Amazon or fly to Gabon? I've been invited to West Africa to do iboga, or could I have a breakthrough healing therapeutic plant medicine or fungi medicine experience with something that's grown in my neighborhood? And mushrooms sort of spoke to me in that way. I was like, wait, and I do think one other hot take I have is there's a lot of like comparing and subjectivity right now of like people saying like iboga is the strongest plant medicine. There's nothing even close. But then the 5-MeO DMT facilitators will say, well, 5-MeO is by far the strongest, weirdest psychedelic. And then people are being like, well, have you ever hit a K-hole? Have you ever done like a big ketamine dose? And I personally think like these are all different ways to access these altered states. And like, you know, have you ever done an ultra macro dose of mushrooms? Because I don't hear many people talking about that. But if you do whatever the psilocin equivalent would be of like a 20-gram dose, a huge heroic dose, there's absolutely states that you can access that have a lot of overlap. So that's my take on it, is like they're different tools for different people. And I think if someone's called to go work with something, they should probably do that. They should be aware of what they're getting into. And but one other thing I'll mention is there's this trend now, maybe you've seen it, I don't know, but I've heard about these centers that will serve like iboga and 5-MeO DMT and peyote, and they'll be giving people like multiple things. Again, I think if that's what somebody wants to do, they should have the right to do that. But you really need to know that maybe that's not a great idea. Like it could just as easily destabilize you if not done intelligently. And some people don't care at all. And if that's you, just be careful and don't hurt anyone else. And hopefully don't serve it to anyone else.
Well, I have an idea. So I'm so convinced that what I've created here is the most reasonable way to run a retreat. I really want you to come over. And if you find something that's bad or humorous, make a video about it. I give you an open invitation to criticize me. And also, I think there's an opportunity for some good, fun content playing on Colombia's history, cocaine, and like there's a lot of humorous content and like comments I get on my posts. It's like, oh, you're just a glorified drug dealer. We could make a sketch about that. I think it would be really funny that of some tourists that went to Colombia to do some cocaine and somehow ended up at an ayahuasca retreat. I think that could be a good piece of content. And because I understand what you say, it's like I feel the same criticism, the fakeness, the white shamans that drank ayahuasca a couple times and now they're a shaman, or mixing different medicines and combo one day, bufo the other day, or just weirdness and the fakeness. Because I kind of like, I avoid it. I also don't understand the fact that you need to like look a certain way or have dreads or copper cups or crystals. And I mean, there's definitely spiritual layers to it that I'm only still accessing, but there's a lot of fakeness in the space. So I try to avoid this. So yeah, I really hope you take this invitation and we can make something funny, even if you make fun of us. Like, I'm open.
Oh, I would love to, and I'm not above being made fun of. Like, I would hope that people could make fun of me and do it well. And I think to really make fun of someone in a way that's funny requires you to know that person, or at least to have respect for them, I think. So, so go back to South Park, which has been a shining light for a lot of people in their satirical lives, or just in terms of pop culture, a lot of the celebrities that South Park really destroys, it's a badge of honor. Like they'll say, I made it, they made fun of me, but it's an honor in that way. And again, I think when you show that you're not bothered by it, it shows that you are confident and secure in yourself. Like there's something about satire, and it happens with all of us, where if I get criticized, sometimes I take it really personally, right? That happens. And then you say, wait a minute. Why did I take that personally? Why did that hurt? And then I think there's something there, and then focus on that and be like, if somebody criticizes you for something that you are stronger than you, it doesn't bother you. But if there's for some reason it bothers you, I think that's more a comment on yourself. So yeah, I'm interested, definitely. And I've been to Colombia several times, love it there, and hope to come back. So I think we can stay in touch after this, and as schedules allow, it would be really interesting to explore this.
Yeah, what you just touched on, I think, is very deep, because it's basically shadow. If someone's making fun of you and you get offended, it's because your shadow gets triggered. It's the same way. The easiest way to discover your shadow is when you look at someone and they really annoy you and you don't know why. It means you see something in them you don't like in yourself. It's your shadow, and you have to do the shadow work. So that's another good reason for humor to exist. In our modern day, the attention spans are very low. People are distracted. It's so hard to educate people. So I think what you're doing with grabbing their attention with humor and then educating them is actually very, very smart and very useful. What is your opinion in general on the way communication is done these days, social media and meme culture? Anything you want to share in that direction?
I think it's so important. Look at the fact that the president, I think both presidents in the US in the last two administrations have leaned into meme culture. And you see Elon Musk and these, very internationally prestigious, influential people leaning into meme culture. And I think that kind of shows how powerful it can be. I've also become interested in meme advertising. Like I mentioned, I like to do all the funny, silly stuff. And I also want to not worry about money, but for all of us, you kind of have to figure out how to put two and two together. You got kids, you got bills, stuff like that. It's turned out that meme advertising can be really great. It's fun, it's engaging. Spirit Airlines, Ryanair does it really well. They make fun of themselves. It's a cheap airline. They lean into that. They kind of lean into the shadow instead of being don't make fun of us for being cheap. That's their whole advertising strategy. It's yeah, we're cheap, but you're going to fly with us because we're cheap. So we can make fun of it, and we'll make fun of you too. So I think as far as communicating, the idea of a meme, as far as I understand it, is it's something that's a replicable unit of culture. And that's what makes things go viral. It's you create an idea, a piece of culture, and then it resonates with people and they want to share it. So that's also what let me know I was onto something with the satire, because it was organic. I didn't convince anyone to share this. People saw it and they're so many times people have said I swear you made this about me, or I swear you made this video about my friend. And I think, no, I didn't actually, but you saw that because it's sort of, again, this archetype. It's this person that exists, right? Of it could be the white shaman. That's an easy one. And then as far as how things get communicated and social media, that's what my background is. I have a degree in media studies from University of San Francisco, and it was on the first wave of social media. So I arrived at university, a psychonaut already, and full blown high dose, fascinated, wild eyes. And this was 2007. So Facebook, I think, launched in 2007 or 6. Twitter launched in 2006. YouTube had just launched. So I really got to ride this first wave of social media and see where it's gone from there. So I've been kind of tracking, studying, building, trying different things. I also feel a sense of, pride in that, it's taken a long time to have some success in this space, right? Back in film school, back when I was an undergrad, I didn't get the breakthroughs I was hoping for. And a lot of people don't, it doesn't happen overnight. But then the fact that I got to continue working towards something, chipping away, working on different projects, playing in bands, teaching multimedia, working on independent films, things like that. And then eventually it's satire and humor that broke through. And I never planned to do humor or satire. It just was a sort of hidden talent, let's say. Like I knew I could be funny, but I never thought about like putting out explicitly satirical skits and content. And so it's the virality, the meme culture that paved the way for all of that. And I started seeing like, oh, if I make this certain type of content that I think is funny and people think it's funny, then it actually affords me more opportunities to do cool things. And so really the last few years, it's been about like finding ways to leverage that to ironically like grow the business. It started out me just kind of like criticizing, rallying against this psychedelic industrial complex. And then I've been co-opted to a degree where now, people hit me up to like, hey, I've got this brand of this, that, or the other, this conscious brand. I want you to promote us. Great. $2,000, and it's kind of wonderful because if people don't like it, I'm like, I'm having fun. I think the most important thing for a lot of people is like avoid burnout. And it's tough to do that. And the way you avoid burnout is by having fun and enjoying things. And memes, satire, humor leans really well into that. So, and then the other side of that is we talk about like the kind of fake plastic shamans, which I think definitely exist. But there's a lot of this like social media glorification of psychedelics, right? Like the psychedelic influencer is such rich subject matter to me. Like, live streaming a mushroom ceremony. I think that's like a wonderful topic for satire. Live streaming an ayahuasca ceremony. This idea of like something very sacred and beautiful, but like I did a skit that I thought was kind of funny about like, get ready with me for an ayahuasca ceremony. People do on TikTok, like get ready with me for a night out. So just talking about like what I'm going to wear to the ceremony, because I think there's an element of that where like you get these people who do a ceremony and then almost immediately after they're updating their Twitter about what they learned in the ceremony, right? Or they're like taking a picture with them. And I just think there's a lot of room for satire and comedy there, because can you imagine like the traditional lineages, which obviously we've evolved from that to a degree, but like once upon a time, as far as I understood it, like if you want to learn about some of these plants or these entheogens, you go in solitude, you diet, you're very intentional about it. And now we've sort of created this fast food culture around it where like you fly in, you do the ceremony, you take selfies, you update it, and then you're back in the office on Monday and you make a LinkedIn post about what the spirits taught you about ROI and Q4 and how you really need to finish strong in Q4. Like this is what my vision was. And I'm not saying it's my place to judge or say like a person's right or wrong. But I do say it's my place to make fun of that. It's my place to be like, I think this is silly and I think we can make fun of it. Like if your whole thing you got out of your ayahuasca trip was how you're going to be like a slightly better employee, that's you. But I think that is a silly way to approach it personally. I think these experiences probably take longer to figure out what happened than to like force this night. Sometimes people have the narrative written before they finish the experience. Like I'm going to go down and I'm going to figure this out. And then they already have it kind of written, their idea. So when they finish with everything, it's like they told the ayahuasca what they wanted. They didn't open themselves up to see, they told them, oh, I want this. And this is what I'm going to manifest. So I digress, but I think, yeah, there's a lot of room for skepticism, humor, and this idea of like the fast food ayahuasca-fication or fast food psychedelic experience.
No, as you talk about it, I understand there's just so many things that are funny in this space, and I appreciate the work you do. I think the jester is necessary, and I definitely had a lot of fun watching your videos. So thank you so much for coming on and talking. This is a very unique topic in the space, so I was glad to have you. And just tell people that haven't seen you, which they must be living under the rock, because I think everyone have seen you, but tell them where to find you and any asks from the audience.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sam, for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I do hope to go to Latvia one of these days. I've always wanted to go to Riga. I mentioned I work with a chocolate maker there, of all things. So yeah, Mycopreneur is the name of the platform. I'm very active online. I try to have at least one post per day, a satirical reel. Lately with traveling, I was in Uganda, as I mentioned, for a mushroom festival last couple weeks. So I've fallen behind a bit, but I do a lot of online content on my Instagram and on LinkedIn, TikTok. I got kicked off of Twitter. That's kind of an amazing story, but I'll save it for another time. So I've been deplatformed from a few because I talk about psychedelics a lot. Anybody who's in this space knows that's a potential thing. I do the newsletter, which covers the mushroom innovation space globally. That comes out every Thursday in the morning. And then on Thursday afternoons, I host an incubator. So if anyone's interested in connecting with other mushroom entrepreneurs, and a lot of mushroom entrepreneurs also have a lot of skin in the game or connections with other things like ayahuasca, tryptamines, so on and so forth, come join us at the incubator. It's free. The invite goes out Thursday morning in the newsletter, and we have really solid presentations. Like we just had one from a group in Colorado that breed exotic psilocybin mushrooms and paniolus mushrooms, so like things way beyond cubensis, zapotecorum, and TTBVI, which is the strongest psilocybin containing mushroom in the world, or at least that's been tested. And they did a whole presentation about like the future of psilocybin mushrooms and beyond cubensis. We do this every week. So this week it's going to be someone from SiloSafe is the organization, which is a third-party labeling system which makes sure that products on the underground market have inside of the product what the labels say, and they match up. And it's a great way to get your finger on the pulse of what's happening, to meet people who are deeply invested in the space and established already, especially in the mushroom innovation space. So that's every Thursday. The podcast still comes out once a week. We always have interesting guests, primarily focused on mushroom innovation across the board. But, we get into a lot of subjects like we did here. I do a lot of public appearances at these different conferences, festivals. So, essentially what I tell people is it's a media platform, and wherever you find media, that's where the platform is. So between the podcast, the newsletter, the online skits, the serious journalism stories, sometimes I'm writing stories for High Times or Double Blind, different magazines, things like that. I would love for all of you to connect with me, whoever feels called to. And I just want to thank you again for the platform and the time. And let's keep in touch about my next visit to Colombia. I've been 2 or 3 times. I'm sure I'll be back.
Thank you, Dennis. Guys, definitely check out the videos. They're very, very funny. So, guys, you've been listening to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, we do the host, Sam Believ, and I'll see you in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to support us and psychedelic renaissance at large, please follow us and leave us a like wherever it is you're listening. Share this episode with someone who will benefit from this information. Nothing in this podcast is intended as medical advice, and it is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This episode is sponsored by La Huayra Ayahuasca Retreat. At La Huayra, we combine affordability, accessibility, and authenticity. La Huayra, connect, heal, grow. Guys, I'm looking forward to hosting you.